Magic the Gathering is getting adventurous. With the upcoming Dungeons & Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realm set, Wizards of the Coast has created genuine dungeon cards for us to explore. And on top of that, we have not only creatures that are themed to this dungeon concept, but even a Planeswalker that is totally focused on the idea of dungeons.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. The Magic Historian.
My bones hurt.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I hope the day finds you well. We are here today to unravel a mystery surrounding the upcoming Adventures in the Forgotten Realms Dungeons & Dragons set, namely the concept of dungeons. This is something I have been eagerly awaiting because the cryptic little clues that I had gotten so far weren't enough. The gargoyle that said venture into the dungeon, the idea that there would be 3 oversized dungeons included with bundles, all of this sort of thing made me go, okay, what exactly is it that we're dealing with? And today, the mystery has been solved. So, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the concept of a dungeon. Then I'm going to show you some cards that interact in a dungeon. We'll go over all 3 variations of dungeons because there are specifically 3 dungeons that exist. And we'll end off by taking a look at the Planeswalker focused on the dungeon concept. So, first things first, what exactly is a dungeon? So, as I said, there's going to be 3 of these dungeon cards. Now, they don't go inside your Magic deck, okay? They stay outside of your Magic deck, similar to the way a sideboard or your commander card would. So they exist in this outside zone. Now, they don't take up slots in your sideboard like the Learn cards from Strixhaven or anything like that. These are just bonus cards, and yes, this is a mechanic you can use in Commander. So here's how it works. When you're instructed to venture into a dungeon, you can choose any one of the 3 dungeon cards that you have and enter that dungeon. At that point, for example, we're gonna use the Lost Mine of Phandelver here as the concept. So each time you venture into the dungeon, you are going to progress through the dungeon. So the first time you venture into the dungeon, you go into the entrance. So in this case, that would be the cave entrance up here. So the first time you venture into a dungeon, you do what it says here. You scry 1, okay? That's the additional effect that you get. Now, each time you venture into the dungeon after that, you're going to progress through the dungeon. So you're going to, the next time it says venture into the dungeon, you're already here at the cave entrance. You'll use like a little token to mark where you are. Now, when you venture to the next step, you actually get to pick on this level. Do you want to go to the Goblin Lair, or do you want to go to the Mine Tunnels? If you choose to go to the Goblin Lair, you create a 1/1 red Goblin creature token, and if you choose to go to the Mine Tunnels, you create a treasure token. Now, that's got some cool flavor to it, right? If you're going into the Goblin area, you get goblins, and if you're going into the mining area, you get treasure. And from that point onwards, you have to follow the path that you're led down. So if you chose the Goblin Lair, the next time you ventured into the dungeon, you'd be going down to this level, and you could choose either to go to the storeroom or the dark pool, but you couldn't choose to go to the fungi cavern unless you had chosen to go to the mine tunnels up here. So as you progress through the dungeon, you're going to be given different options. So you can kind of progressively plan out how you want to do things. So on this level, if you go to the storeroom, you get a +1/+1 counter on a target creature. If you went to the dark pool instead, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So in the example where we went through the Goblin Lair, you'd have your 1/1 creature. The next time you ventured in, you can choose either to put a +1/+1 counter on that goblin token or another creature, or you can make your opponents lose a life and you gain a life. And if you had gone to the mine tunnels, instead you'd have the choice of making your opponent lose a life, gain a life, or you gain a life, or the fungi cavern, where you can give target creature -4, -0 until your next turn. And then the final step is the Temple of Dumathian, and that's draw a card. Now, once you have gone all the way through the dungeon, you are considered to have completed that dungeon. Now, the next time you get a venture into the dungeon, you have a choice. You can choose any one of the 3 dungeons again, which means you can go into the other 2 dungeons if you want, or you can continue to go through the same dungeon. And this allows you to build your deck strategy around it. I mean, if you take a look at the versatility of this card. You get a lot of options. You get the option to scry, make a 1/1 token, make a treasure token, put a +1/+1 counter on one of your guys. Each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. Give a creature -4 and -0, and draw a card. Now, the scry 1 and draw a card are both automatically going to happen, but the rest of them are up to how you choose to maneuver through this. And it's interesting to note that this is all like coming from a colorless source. So this is going to go by any kind of protection from colors. There's not really that many ways for your opponents to interact with what's going on, and there's no way for them to change your progress through the dungeon or to make the choices for you. So let's take a look at an example of a card that lets you venture into the dungeon, and that's Nadar the Selfless Paladin. So this is a Dragon Knight, and he's 1 white and 2 for a 3/3. He has Vigilance. Whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks, venture into the dungeon. So as soon as you put him out, if you hadn't already started a dungeon, you would venture into the dungeon, pick one of the dungeon cards, go into the first room, and then each time he attacked, you would get to venture further into the dungeon. It's kind of funny the way that it's like venture into the dungeon is the trigger. So it's like venture into the dungeon, then leave the dungeon, then venture into the dungeon instead of venture further into the dungeon. So it's a little bit clunky from a mechanical standpoint in terms of the word choice, but overall, you get the idea. You keep progressing through the dungeon, and he also gives a good example of what happens when you've completed a dungeon. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 as long as you've completed a dungeon. Now, this doesn't multiply, so if you've completed multiple dungeons, you only get +1/+1 across all of your creatures. But honestly, this is a solid little package right here. 3 mana for a 3/3 that each time you use it is going to progress you down the path and allow you to choose these different things from the dungeons. And he looks pretty dope. He definitely does look like a paladin. He's got that shining silver armor, the big old defensive shield, a Holy Avenger sword presumably, and you can see part of his party behind him as well. You can see there's a cleric behind him with the healing staff raised high, and an elf with a big old longbow up on some big monument in the back. It's got a nice enter the dungeon kind of vibe to it, and we actually have 2 pieces of artwork for this guy. So this is done in the old monster manual style where it's like the old Dungeons and Dragons books, but other than that, it's the same card. And I dig the vibe of it overall. You know, it definitely has that old school D&D feel to it. So let's take a look at the other dungeons, because like I said, there are 3 of them. Now, it's interesting to note, while I'm on that subject, down here at the very bottom, you'll notice that it says 022. The dungeons are 20, 21, and 22, but I don't know what the first 20 cards are. So I don't know if that's supposed to be the first 20 cards are tokens and these show up in the token slots in the pack. That's my assumption because of the little letter T that's down there as well. But I thought that was worth pointing out. So this is the Tomb of Annihilation. You may be familiar with that. That was a recent Dungeons and Dragons adventure book that they put out. So these are all real D&D dungeons, which is a nice nod to anybody who genuinely like plays D&D and appreciates that. So the Tome of Annihilation is actually a little more straightforward than the first dungeon we looked at. You start out in the trapped entry. Each player loses 1 life. Then you move down either to Veils of Fear, where each player loses 2 life unless they discard a card, or the Oublié, where you discard a card, sacrifice an artifact, a creature, and a land. What? Discard a card, sack an artifact, a creature, and a land. Oh, it's just all bad. It's all bad for you. Good Lord, why would you? Okay, all right. That's a path you really have to plan for. That's crazy. I was not expecting that. I'll be honest. I read through the one dungeon thoroughly to make sure I understood it. And then I'm like, the other ones, it'll be fine. We'll just go through it. I hadn't read this one. Good Lord, that's crazy. So, Veils of Fear. Each player loses 2 life unless they discard a card. And then Sandfall Cell. Each player loses 2 life unless they sacrifice an artifact, a creature, or a land. So interestingly enough, if you choose to go the oubliette route, you get to go through the dungeon faster, right? Because it's basically 3 steps to the end. The first step gets you in the door, the second step gets you to the oubliette, third step gets you to the end of the dungeon. So you can complete a dungeon faster. That's why they have the discard and sack and everything, because otherwise it might be too fast to unlock dungeons. All right, okay. So the Sandfall Cell Veils of Fear is a longer route, so you have to delve into the dungeon one more time, right? first. All right. And then ultimately, when you make it to the end, you get to the Cradle of the Death God. That's amazing. Create the Atropal, a legendary 4/4 Black God horror creature token with Death Touch. Okay. So they don't want you to be able to get there really quickly and easily. They need to put some costs in it so you're not cranking out crazy 4/4 tokens too easily. And admittedly, at least it's legendary, so you can't make a ton of them. But that's pretty cool, man. This is an adventure to basically bring a death god horror into your service. That is awesome. All right. Then we've got Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Now this one is even crazier than the first one we looked at. I tried to pick one that would help to explain how it works without being too intense. And this one I was just like, no, we'll leave that. Because this has a lot of steps. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have to go through 7 different layers. You start at the Yawning Portal where you gain a life. Then you go to the dungeon level where you scry 1. Then you choose between the Goblin Bazaar or the Twisted Caverns, either creating a treasure token or making it so a creature can't attack until your next turn. Then you move on to the Lost level right here where you scry 2. Then it's the Runestone Caverns where you either exile the top 2 cards of your library and you can play them, or Muriel's Graveyard where you create 2 black skeleton tokens that are 1/1. Then we've got the Deep Mines where you scry 3, a lot of scry action. Notice 1, 2, 3, that's kind of cool. And then you move on to the Mad Wizard's Lair. Draw 3 cards and reveal them. You may cast one of them without paying its mana cost. Ooh, wow, okay. So you do have to venture into the dungeon a lot, but you could have a really powerful effect as a result. I like this. Honestly, this is a cool idea. So let's take a look at the other cards we have that are associated with dungeons. So you've got Gloomstalker, which is 1 white and 2 for a 2/3. As long as you've completed a dungeon, Gloomstalker has double strike. So that's all right. You know what I mean? 3 mana for a creature that's going to do 4 as a common. This is going to be decent in drafts. The flavored text says, I'll make sure you never mistake a roper for a stalagmite again. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to have that happen. It's like, oh, I thought that was a rock formation. No, actually, it's a deadly roper, and it's going to mess you up. So, the artwork is pretty straightforward. This guy looks like a standard kind of adventurer. He's got like a pair of pickaxe, mattock kind of things going on. He's got his cloaks, his pouches. This totally has that D&D adventure style vibe. And Gloomstalker is an evocative name, but ultimately this is mostly just a draft card. So let's move on. We've got another draft level guy here. This is the Shortcut Seeker. 1 blue and 3 for a 2/5 human rogue. Whenever Shortcut Seeker deals combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon. Ah, the old trapdoor under a rug trick. This is almost too easy. I love that. The idea of these straightforward, like, hey, check it out. I found a shortcut right here under the rug. There just happens to be a path we can take. And he's got that, like, Dungeons and Dragons rogue vibe to it, where it's like, come on, man, I found a path down here. Off we go. I love the arrogant nature of it. Like, they're making it too simple, but you wonder, is it leading to a trap? Is that set up in a way where it was meant to be obvious and it's leading you to your doom? I really love Dungeons and Dragons. It's a fun concept. This is a cool overlap with Magic, I gotta say. So, this is the Planeswalker that is associated with Dungeons and Dragons. I should say specifically with dungeons, obviously. Anything in this sense associated with Dungeons and Dragons. So, this is ellywick Tumblestrum. What a fun name for a bard. 2 green and 2 for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. Her +1 ability is venture into the dungeon. So every turn you're going to be able to progress through the dungeon as long as you have ellywick. She is a dungeon enabler. Second ability, -2. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them, put it into your hand. If it's legendary, you gain 3 life. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I guess the vibe is supposed to be, when it's the digging for 6 cards, that she's just playing this music that brings all of the woodland animals out. And it, like, I don't know if that frog is her friend or that frog just likes her and just jumped up there, but I love it. I love this artwork. It's just so silly and fun. She's got this really ornate lute that she's playing or whatever, and up at the top it looks, what is going, is there a card stuck in the top up at the frets there? Up by the tuning pegs? Is that what's going on? Does she have it, like, slid in there? Or is that some kind of weird enchanted device from Magic? from Dungeons and Dragons, I should say, that I'm not familiar with. I like this. This nice, kind of serene, having rocking out in the woodlands, getting frogs on my shoulder. There's fairies in the background. You know what I mean? That's making Spotify tunes out in the woodlands. So I'm guessing the -2 ability, looking through the 6 cards looking for a creature, is tied into the way that she draws creatures in. And I like this. Just, she looks like she's having a great old time. And then the -7 ability, the ultimate, is you get an emblem with creatures you control have trample and haste and get +2/+2 for each differently named dungeon you've completed. So if you've managed to beat all 3 dungeons, your creatures have trample, haste, and +6/+6, which, I mean, that's a tall order. It's going to be difficult to do, but even just 1 dungeon completed where your creatures have trample, haste, and +2/+2, that is a beefy emblem. And take a look, we actually have an alternate version of the card that I like even more. And again, you can see the frog chilling on her shoulder, so it's like, oh man, I want this frog to be like her familiar or pet. I tried doing some internet searches to find out who she was, like who she exists as in the Dungeons and Dragons world, or if this is a planeswalker they created for Magic just to be like a dungeon planeswalker, and I can't really conclusively find the answer. If you know about ellywick tumblestrum, tell me! I can't tell if she's an elf or a little halfling or whatever, but I just love the joyous vibe and like harmony chill times of the artwork. She's there playing music for the woodland creatures, and there's this fairy, it looks like one of the moon sprites actually, flying in with like a flower for her. It's like, here, I have a gift for you. I enjoy the music you play. And you can see all kinds of different creatures around. It's kind of hard to see some of them because the text box obscures them, but you can even see the little bunny rabbit ears sticking up over the edge in the background. I love it. I love this card. And it's cool that they made a planeswalker dedicated to the dungeons, because everyone's going to have the opportunity to use all 3 dungeons. So for me, it's definitely it's a different choice. I wasn't expecting dungeons to be as involved as they are, and I really like it from a flavor standpoint. Wizards of the Coast is going out there and really exploring the space outside of the actual deck. And I mean, I like more options. I like Plane Chase, Arch Enemy, all that kind of stuff. So I understand it adds complexity and some people may not like all the fiddly extra bits, but for me, I enjoy variety. So I am down with dungeons. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Big thank you to all of my patrons. Thank you for supporting my channel and what I do here. Apparently I'm getting tongue twisted thinking about how much it means to me. Thank you so much. Anyways, thanks for coming by, everybody. I will see you all for the next video.